watching Politics Unscripted, the segment of the show, The Editor's Choice. And this is where we discuss some of the stories making headlines in your favorite newspapers. And joining me for this discussion, Thanduxolo Jika. He is a senior journalist at the Sunday Times, an investigative reporter there. Spector is associate editor at the Daily Maverick, and Theto Mahlakoana, senior political reporter at Eyewitness News. To all of you, thank you so much for making the time for this discussion. Can I pick up with you, Spector, first? And I have been listening to an interview done by the BBC, and they were interviewing someone from the Africa Delivery Alliance, Africa Vaccine Delivery Alliance, Dr. Alakija. And she was quite straightforward about her reaction to the imposition of the travel ban, either to South Africa or from South Africa, by many of the countries who have done so. And she's of the view that had the first few cases of COVID-19, which were first detected in Wuhan, China, if they had been detected in Africa, it's clear that the world would have basically locked us out. Do you agree with her view?
Well, I think it's fair to say that the reaction of the world to what happened from Wuhan was sufficiently, I'm going to use the word guardedly, lackadaisical in terms of controls and management, that by the time it became clear what was being dealt with, it was obviously too late. I mean, all across Europe, obviously, then in the United States and elsewhere. I think I was also listening to an interview, and this was Dr. Anthony Fauci speaking. I think it was late last night, our time, and he was arguing that the new imposition of bans on flights to various southern African nations was done this time through, quote, an abundance of caution, close quote. In a sense, people have been scalded or burned by what happened a year and a half or so ago, and this time around, no one was going to be caught off guard. Unfortunately, the initial media discussion and expert discussion, for that matter, about COVID Omicron seems to have taken on the texture of Omicron is a South African variant, as opposed to what we all understand, a variant first detected in South Africa, and there's a world of difference between those two phrases. So whether it's the right thing to do or not, we only are going to know in a little while once more information about this particular variation becomes clear. The problem with viruses generally, and I'm drawing on my high school and university biology classes now, as well as lots and lots of reading recently, is that effectively viruses mutate. They mutate continuously. They mutate vigorously. And the ones that are less effective, they die out because they're outcompeted by others. And we can't predict, none of us, which one is going to come up next. And so we are truly in for the problem of finding out only through experience rather than simply straightforwardly modeling which way the virus is going to shift in its chemical and molecular structure.
Yeah.
And that's a real challenge, and nobody really has an answer for that just yet.
Yeah. Theto, let's pick up with you before we lose you. I see that your technology seems very unstable. Earlier, I had a conversation with medical scientists, and they were, at least one of them, said to me that the manner in which we made this announcement was, quote unquote, naive, almost to say that because we were trying to, I think, put out to the world that we have these fantastic medical scientists in the country, we went out with this information not knowing exactly how the world was going to react to us, and therefore in a way, maybe strategically at communicating this, we could have done things a little differently in order to not get the kind of reaction we are getting. Do you agree with that sentiment?
Good afternoon, Toli. I mean, firstly, to assess the kind of hysteria that we have seen emanate out of the announcement from South African scientists, we'd have to go back a couple of steps, a while ago. When the Delta variant, for example, was discovered and then publicized and shared with the world, the speed was pretty much at the pace that this current announcement was. Absolutely no reason for one to even suspect or even entertain the idea that South Africa is naive in its handling of this information. And one must then come to this kind of reasoning, because even then, you'd remember when the Delta variant was then shared with the world that we have indeed found this, the language was the same. I mean, like Brooks says, the language was the same. There was absolutely this understanding or even just, insistence from the international community to say that this is a South African variant, although we know that it was only discovered here first, scientifically, and not necessarily that we are particularly the root of this particular strain. So there's already, literature, and there's already precedents suggesting that we are simply doing what we deem to be in the right, treatment of the entire global community. Because otherwise, if we were a country that is self-seeking and that is, of course, obsessed with self and its own economic, advancement, we would have just simply put this under the carpet. And that is definitely not the nature of South African scientists and not the nature of the South African government in the treatment of this pandemic. So one cannot even deduct that to some degree we were naive. We are not naive. We are simply doing the right thing as we know how. Because if we don't share this information with the world, how else is the global community going to be better or well informed in dealing with this virus? Because it's going to be with us for a long time, Toli. You'd remember that some scientists are predicting that it's going to be with us for the next 5 years. Mm-hmm. And if the next 5 years, when this virus mutates, this virus is due, we discover that, in fact, it has now taken a different shape and we keep that to ourselves, whose benefit is it for? Because we know how interconnected we are. Yeah. There's no way that can simply say that it's not our problem, therefore we are not going to engage or entertain it in the global arena. But what we have seen, of course, is hysteria that is laced with a lot of racism and a lot of, exclusion, which I would imagine had always been at the top of someone's mind. Yeah. to resort to the kind of measures that we have seen the UK and other European plus the US react with, colleagues.
Thanduxolo Jika, let's come to you. And I mean, the story of the day, I look at the City Press, the Sunday Times that you work for, they are all leading with this hysteria around this newly detected variant. If we look at the Sunday Times, for example, the newspaper that you work for, and the headline there, enforce jabs, not lockdowns. Do you think it is going to be easier said than done, knowing just how reticent our government is in forcing people to do certain things?
Well, Toli, I mean, reading the Sunday Times story, there's a lot of arguments there, good arguments made, and quite sober arguments as well made by experts, people in the tourism industry, etc. Look, the reality is the fact that South Africa has to aggressively act on jabs, people on vaccination, people to be vaccinated. You would read one expert actually points out there that one of the major reasons and perfect conditions for this virus to continue to mutate is unjabbed people. It's people that have not been vaccinated. It's a perfect condition for it to continue to mutate.
Can I interrupt you there for a second, Thanduxolo?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
On that very point, this week I listened to a radio conversation and a caller says, we're not sure that the mutation that you're talking about is as a result or comes from people who are unvaccinated. Just those views. I mean, how much education have we had around what vaccines are doing and are going to do?
It's one of those points, Koli. We've also covered those in the Sunday Times. I've also argued that government needs to take more, take people into confidence. There needs to be more education about the vaccine itself. People are, of course, not only in South Africa, but throughout the world, people have a lot of questions around vaccines. But I feel that in terms of our government, there's been lack of that drive to get people vaccinated. And as such, and also, our government also drives confusing messages. When it comes to issues of vaccination and COVID, we had a situation just a few months ago, recently, for the past 2 months, where people were gathering in huge numbers. President Cyril Ramaphosa was one of those people presiding over those people, letting people gather in huge numbers while they were campaigning. Now, that is a mixed message. You are saying to people, and especially to those who don't actually believe in vaccination, and to the people who don't believe in COVID itself, that look at this situation, actually, it might not be in existence. So COVID took a break during election campaigns, and now it's actually back. So I think there's been lack of consistency in government conveying proper messaging when it comes to vaccination in terms of COVID itself. And right now, and rightfully so, you would see also in the Sunday Times story, people are saying that, especially churches, why should we now listen to the government that broke its own rules and regulations?
Yeah.
So the South African government has itself to actually blame. But there is a serious need to have an aggressive drive for people to be vaccinated and more education around the issue of vaccination.
All right. Colleagues, I'm going to ask that we pause there for a moment, but just a heads up, I am going to ask you for the stories that piqued your interest, and I know that you all are with the various media houses, and there are interesting stories that you all have been covering in the past week. We are going to pick up on the conversation when we return. You're watching Politics Unscripted. You're watching Politics Unscripted, the segment of the show, The Editor's Choice. And this is where we discuss the stories making headlines on some of your favorite newspapers, weekend newspapers, that is. And for this discussion, we are joined by Thanduxolo Jika, a senior journalist at the Sunday Times, Brooks Spector, associate editor at the Daily Maverick, and Theto Mahlakoana. She is the senior political reporter at Eyewitness News. Can I pick up with you, Brooks? And I suppose as a way to sort of throw forward, the expectation tonight is that President Ramaphosa will address the nation. Your thoughts on how he is going to approach this issue of the travel ban from or by governments internationally. I've noticed just a very strong reaction from our government, particularly to governments like the UK, which have come out to say, look, we were slow off the mark when this thing hit us, and we had very bad public reaction from residents or citizens in the UK, and we simply can't find ourselves in the same position. How does President Ramaphosa navigate the diplomatic line?
Oh, it's a good question. And we'll know in a couple hours what he's actually decided to do and how he's done it. But I think it's from my perspective, I think he's got to have two different but complementary messages simultaneously. On the one hand, he has He has to deliver a message that calms the population, that doesn't send us all into a state of incipient panic. He has to make sure that people understand what COVID Omicron is as well as what it isn't, and that the mechanisms that are being used to deal with COVID generally, vaccination, social distancing, et cetera, are still both valid and useful. On the other hand, he's got to, at the same time, be stern. He has to show that although he understands the international effort that is underway to isolate travelers to from Southern Africa, that although it may not have been fair, it's understandable, and we will, in his words, we will deal with our circumstances effectively. That means that he's going to have a third message that builds into that, which is we have got to get many more people vaccinated. And even vaccinations on their own are not the answer. We had dinner with some friends who were well and truly vaccinated a couple of days ago.
Yeah.
And I got a phone call today saying, oops, we've tested positive. And so my wife and I, we're going to go off tomorrow to get checked just in case. So we have to hear from President Ramaphosa these different but complementary messages, all with the same time and all with the same level of both authoritativeness and calmness. It's a very difficult dance to achieve.
Very interesting indeed. Theto, let's come to you and try and transition away from the Omicron variant. What story piqued your interest this Sunday?
So I was reading the City Press, Toli, and I mean, this story enrages me as much as it does grab my attention. And it's managed to stay with me for as long as it's been around. The Senzo Meyiwa case. And I see the City Press is telling us that, the singer Kelly Khumalo, who was Senzo Meyiwa's lover at the time, is due to be charged for perjury. And, it got me so angry, Toli. I mean, I don't know how you guys feel about the story, that it's been with us for as long as that man has been gone. And yet we have week after week some sort of a new revelation. And I put it in inverted marks because it really isn't new. And one would have thought that at this point in the lifeblood of our country, understanding just how bad and devastating crime is to our daily lives, this matter would have been put to rest. We have 4 people who are in front of an entire court system who have been accused and charged with killing Senzo Meyiwa. Yes, this story will not leave us. And it caught me wondering if every time the police minister pulls the paper, he has the same sentiment. Yep. Because I certainly think the Meyiwa family deserves to rest and deserves some certainty and closure. And this continuous, for a lack of a better word, merry-go-round around who exactly is responsible for his death is troubling. And it makes one wonder what will happen should you then be the victim of a heinous crime someday and be killed. Will your family be subjected to the same horror of having to continuously deal with the subject of who exactly is behind your murder? So it's just a story that stayed with me, Toli, from today's very, heavy and politicized, coverage.
Yeah, and you remind me of the story that was actually covered by the Mail and Guardian, the front page of the Mail and Guardian this weekend. You have a very nice picture of our head of prosecutions, Shamila Batoy, and I think the question is, where are the prosecutions? It talks to the criminal justice system in South Africa. Thanduxolo, let's not take away the spotlight from you. The stories that piqued your interest, and I see that you and Sabelo Skiti here on the front page of the Sunday Times, you're talking about Eskom sabotage, another of my favorite stories. What exactly are you talking about there?
Absolutely, Koli. That story is very important. When we talk about Eskom, we are talking about the backbone of our economy, which has certainly collapsed. and led us, down an unsavory garden path at this juncture, in the sense that, there seems to be no turning around from what it has become. So the story essentially speaks about sabotage that now the chief executive director spoke about recently, that some of the acts of sabotage, they discovered some acts of sabotage in some of their power stations. Our story actually goes back to 2020, January 2020, where they were given all these reports by private investigators who discovered a network of criminals, essentially, inside Eskom, that the technical department in some of the power stations, particularly at Tutuka, that they were colluding with suppliers, contractors at Tutuka power stations, and deliberately break some of the components that keep our lights on. And then you would find those suppliers would come in and then supply the new material, if they do. And then the employees at Eskom, who are technical, in the technical department, would actually claim anything between 120 to 150 hours in overtime, which actually shows that it's a scheme that has been going on for years. Hence, the issue of load shedding and sabotage should not be taken lightly, and that there's been a lack of action from Eskom taking to task those employees. But it seems that at Tutuka, currently Eskom has taken some action, suspended the power station manager since June this year. So we're talking about the network of criminals that are essentially also contributing to our load shedding.
Sure. We're going to have to see how this story of sabotage is going to end, Thanduxolo, because just last Sunday I had a conversation with Andre Tereta in studio here, and he was very cautious to even go as close as saying he suspects there might be some people who are involved in sabotage within Eskom. I asked that question directly to him, and he was very careful in responding to that or implicating any one of his employees. Brooks, as we wrap up the conversation, stories that piqued your interest?
Yeah, let me just give you a quick list, and then you can decide how you want to deal with it. First, off the list, the new German Chancellor, Oscar Scholz. The end of the Angela Merkel era is now upon us. He comes from the other political party, the Social Democrats, and it opens up the question of, quote unquote, who leads Europe? And the answer to that is clearly not very clear. The next one on my list, of course, was Boris Johnson giving a speech in which the main character of his speech appeared to have been Peppa Pig. So you have to wonder just exactly what's going on in the mind of Boris Johnson. More seriously, the whereabouts and the security of Chinese tennis star Peng Shuai, who either was sexually assaulted by a senior ranking official of the Chinese Communist Party and government, or she's made it all up out of whole cloth. But in any case, it runs the risk of embarrassing the Chinese just as they are entering the home stretch of their preparations for the Winter Olympics. Now, South Africans don't worry about the Winter Olympics all that much, but the Chinese, because you have like 3 or 4 people in a team when it happens. But for the Chinese, Xi Jinping has really staked his name on this one being delivered as a sort of the opening moment of the next stage of his public career. And if there are diplomatic boycotts or even actual team boycotts, that's going to be very interesting.
Sure.
COVID, we've talked about. The Ukraine, the Russians may or may not be preparing to engage in a more overt kind of invasion activity to hammer home the idea that Ukraine is not going to be able to join the EU or NATO or anything else in the West forever and ever until forever. And then, of course, you turn to the U.S. and two criminal cases that came to a conclusion. One, Kyle Rittenhouse, the young man who showed up in Kenosha, Wisconsin, with a semi-automatic assault rifle, shot 3 people, killing 2 of them, who was rendered not guilty by virtue of the open carry laws in that state and the state's very liberal self-defense rulings and laws. By contrast, in Georgia, the 3 men who effectively hunted down Ahmaud Arbery and shot him and killed him, 3 white men. Arbery was black, and in the state of Georgia, with a jury of 11 white people, 1 black person, all 3 of them were convicted of murder. Just exactly how those 2 cases talk to each other is going to be the subject of analysis and discussion for a very long time to come.
Yeah, and that story we actually have been running here on the channel. Thank you very much, colleagues, for that roundup of the stories that made headlines this week. Brooks Spector, they're giving us the international flavor as well. Thanduxolo Jika from the Sunday Times, thank you very much. And Theto Mahlakoana from Eyewitness News. Thank you very much for your time there.